Take two. No post-production happening here. It is what it is. I got to remember to touch all the buttons at the right time. So hold on there. Here we go. Recording. Welcome to episode 2 of the Red Roof Recovery Show. This is a program to soften the path of recovery from substance and behavioral addictions. I'm your host, Tanya MacIntyre. And this beautiful theme song that we're listening to is provided by Russell Scott. It is aptly titled, Greatest Bravery. And it sure takes a lot of bravery, for me at least, to live without the anesthetic of drugs and alcohol, to endure the operation of life. I kind of half-jokingly say that during my weekly SMART recovery meetings. And I'll tell you a little bit more about SMART as we go into the program. I created the Red Roof Recovery Radio Show to share my experience, strength, and hope. And it is my hope that it will help you manage whatever substance or behavioral addiction you may be struggling with, because it's an interesting thing about addictions. They all seem to activate the same little part of the brain. So it doesn't really matter what you're addicted to. SMART recovery can certainly help you in managing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors around your addictions. And I've certainly had my own experience around addiction recovery. I've been on my journey since 2009. I know in episode 1, I think I inadvertently said 2019, but I was trying to multitask. I was trying to do a video and do my audio at the same time. And multitasking, as we know, is a myth. So my recovery journey started in 2009, and at the time, my husband and I were in Spain, Majorca, Spain. And everyone says, oh, what a wonderful place to have your aha moment, but you know what? It's just geography. Wherever you go, there you are, kind of thing, right? So I'm very passionate about sharing my failures and my successes because it has been anything but a smooth ride. Definitely not a linear journey by any means. And you will often hear me say that AA saved my life, and SMART recovery gave me my life back, literally. And SMART is an acronym. It stands for Self-Management and Recovery Training. And I've been a facilitator with SMART since 2018. And while AA practices 12 steps of recovery and is a spiritually based program, SMART practices 4 pillars of recovery. And number 1 is probably the hardest step to take, right? We need to develop and maintain our motivation to abstain. And then number 2, we learn how to handle our urges. Number 3, we manage our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And the 4th pillar of SMART is to get where we all want to get to, is to live a happy, healthy, balanced life, whatever that looks like to you. So I mentioned that I don't really host a recovery meeting. I facilitate a recovery meeting for SMART Recovery every week on Friday nights. And you can find the link for that Zoom meeting at smartrecoverytoronto.com. And SMART Recovery itself was started 25 years ago. It's a nonprofit organization, and the head office is in Mentor, Ohio. And I found that rather appropriate for me because mentorship has been definitely a crucial element of my recovery. And I just liked the fact that it was in Mentor, Ohio. I thought it would mean something special, and it certainly has to me. I've been a facilitator with SMART since 2018. And I'm happy to say that, I was part of AA, and I still am. When we do face-to-face meetings, I still like to go to the AA meetings, the local AA meetings, because I think the peer support available at AA meetings is extraordinary. And it's certainly something that SMART Recovery is working on, is developing more peer support within their networks. And right now, because of the pandemic, we are all doing everything remotely. So all of our face-to-face meetings have been switched to the remote delivery of Zoom primarily. And don't you wish you did some investing in Zoom when this whole thing broke out in 2019, early 2020? I've never had the courage since the crash of 2008 to start playing around in the stock market again, because of course once you've taken a hit in a stock market crash, you're a little gun shy. So yeah, I imagine the Zoom stock has skyrocketed because everyone I talk to is on Zoom now. So speaking of mentorship, with SMART being from Mentor, Ohio, it's a nonprofit organization. And of course, we rely on things like the proceeds from the handbook. So Smart Recovery does have a handbook, and it's available at smartrecovery.org. And the proceeds from these handbooks help keep things going because, of course, we depend on volunteers to keep things rolling with our meetings. And in this Smart Recovery handbook, Smart Recovery is based on cognitive behavioral therapy. And although cognition sounds like a difficult thing, it's really not. Cognition is just thought. And cognitive behavioral therapy is when we direct more rational analysis inward to look at whether or not what we're, that committee in the head, that all those voices that are going on in our head at any time, I call it the committee in my head, that inner dialogue, the inner critic. When all of that is going on, it helps to interrupt it and direct rational analysis inward. And Smart Recovery has a lot of great techniques and tools to help you through that. And one thing that I love about Smart Recovery is that it's a customizable program. So there's not a lot of doctrine to follow. You choose what you want to, not unlike 12-step programs actually. They always say take what you need and leave the rest, which is fantastic because I think it's key for us wherever we are in our recovery is to keep looking, right? Just keep looking for solutions. And try not to get boggled down in the guilt and shame of the recovery process while you're going through that process of looking for something that resonates with you, because it's really important to find something that clicks with you. And what has clicked for me is not only Smart Recovery and being a facilitator with Smart. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a little sip here. So doing those weekly meetings with SMART really is an integral element of my recovery program and my recovery journey for sure. And also it's different mentorship that I've gravitated toward. So people like the late, great Wayne Dyer, Dr. Wayne Dyer, he was one of my virtual mentors for many, many years. And when I went into a rehab in Spain in 2009, February of 2009, part of the program there, it was based on a 12-step program, the recovery program, and part of my homework was to read a book by Louise Hay, and it was called, I believe it was called You Can Heal Your Life. And I read that book as part of my homework every evening, and something resonated with Louise for me. Maybe it was because of early abandonment from my mother. My mother left me when I was, things started to get rocky around age 7, and then she finally physically left when I was 9. And there's something about that mother abandonment that stays with you for a long, long time. And Louise said something that kind of resonated with me is that, one of the most challenging things we'll do in our lifetime is learn how to love ourselves. And boy, oh boy, could I ever relate with that. And I do believe that for me at least, I am still in many ways a psychological child trying to fill voids that were not filled during my childhood. And one of my mentors, Gabor Mate, Dr. Mate, he's a Canadian doctor. He spent 12 years on Vancouver's east side. And Vancouver's east side at that time, back in the 80s and 90s, it was known as the most highly dense, most densely populated, chronically addicted population in North America, if not the world. And Dr. Mate was working with that population for 12 years. So then he started, a speaking circuit to try to educate the medical community about addiction recovery. And this is what he says. He wrote a highly acclaimed book called The Hungry Ghost, and it's a biopsychosocial perspective of addiction. So I'm quoting Dr. Gabor Mate here when I say this is how the system works. And anyone who's been part of the system, even if you're just affected in a small way, the system is powerful, and the messages it sends to us, very, very powerful. That comes up in my weekly meetings all the time. So because something runs in our family, it has to be genetic, right? We've heard that. I come from a long line of people who are addicted in my family. So I was believing that line of logic that, if you suffer with any kind of drug, alcohol addiction, behavioral addiction, substance addiction, then it's partly genetic. A lot of it is genetic. And that is false logic, according to Dr. Gabor Mate. The system is illogical because it advertises alcohol during things like the Super Bowl, right? And of course, reaping the rewards of the billions of dollars in taxes that come through that. Two of the most addictive and harmful substances on earth, booze and cigarettes, nicotine and alcohol. And then, of course, we have a system that then incarcerates people for being addicted or even dealing illegal drugs that are far less harmful to your health than alcohol and tobacco, right? So it's quite a paradox when we have government officials kind of talking out of both sides of the mouth with regard to the harm to our health with certain things and who decides what drugs are legal and illegal. So I think it was in Portugal, they did an outcome study where they made everything legal. And I think it had an extraordinary effect, actually, on addiction rates for good. It was a good thing to do. So I think that evidence would have been enough for other countries to follow that lead and legalize everything, and then put some tax dollars, some of those billions of tax dollars into the healthcare system and recovery programs and stuff. But hey, I'm an idealist. Let's all get on the ideal bus and go to La La Land kind of thing, right? But in North America, we're dealing with a lot of biases in the medical community. I often tell the story on my weekly meeting about clinicians who still hold a lot of bias around addiction recovery. And one example that I give is a recent research study that was done on a group of clinicians who were presented with the same patient on a piece of paper. And the first go around is that the patient is introduced to this group of clinicians as being a substance abuser. And then the survey goes to the clinicians about, what did you feel about this patient, blah, blah, blah. And generally, the clinicians, when they hear that a patient is a substance abuser, the collective thought process and the belief system around that is like this, and this is based on this research study. And it said that the majority of the clinicians then felt, because this patient was a substance abuser, that they were therefore culpable, responsible for their behavior, and they also deserved criminal punishment. So now skip ahead to the second part of this research study. And this same patient is now introduced to this same group of clinicians. However, this time, the patient is introduced as having a substance use disorder. So now when the clinicians are surveyed on their beliefs and thoughts around this patient, it's quite interesting because they have made a total flip in their beliefs around this patient. Now they believe that the patient can be treated with a combination of therapy and medicine, drugs and therapy. And this person has an excellent chance of full recovery. So I found that fascinating that finally I think we are starting to become more aware in the medical community that there's some extreme biases that are not helping the standards of care when it comes to addiction recovery and people who are suffering with addictions, because people who are suffering with addictions are not their addiction, right? So I love that about Smart Recovery too, is that they encourage you to think about how you're talking to yourself. How are you feeding that committee in your head, right? That inner critic, that narrative that keeps running on a loop over and over and over again. It never shuts up. So we need to interrupt that sometimes with more positive things, positive labels. And we have a lot of fun on our weekly Smart Recovery meetings doing brainstorming around how can we reframe that thought, that sentence more positively so it's actually serving us, it's helpful instead of unhelpful. So some pretty interesting stuff with Dr. Gabor Mate. I'm a big fan of Dr. Mate and the work that he's doing, so I encourage you to look him up as well. That's Gabor, Gabor, and the last name is Mate, Mate. And he is just an extraordinary doctor. And, you know, he also talks openly around his own addictions and how that affected not only his profession as a doctor, but also his role as a husband and father. So he does a lot of talking with his adult son now as well on the motivational and inspirational talk circuit that you can tap into anytime if you're looking for some motivation and inspiration. So when it comes to thoughts, I'm a little bit of a fanatic around how we're using our words. So I think it all begins with our words. And the equation that I put on the whiteboard in the Zoom platform when we're having our meetings, I'll write words and then equal sign thoughts, and then equal sign moods and emotions, equal sign behaviors, because I think there's a direct correlation from the words we're using, because the words we're using actually form the thoughts that we're thinking, and then those thoughts that we're thinking are forming our moods, our emotions, our feelings, and then, of course, all of that compounds to feed our behaviors. So if we can be cognizant, if we're just aware of how we're talking to ourselves and others, I think that's the first step, is to make our language more positive. I interviewed Michael Lozier. He's a Canadian law of attraction expert, and Michael, he's quite a flamboyant man in his teachings. He's very passionate about law of attraction, and he always talks about how powerful our language is, and he said, there's 3 words you need to eliminate from your language. They are don't, not, and no. And he said, not that those words specifically are negative, it's the context in which you're using them, right? So, because when you're giving your attention to something that you don't want, you're actually attracting that vibration to you. So Michael Lozier, law of attraction guy, I also did a series with him a couple of years ago. But law of attraction never changes, right? It's exactly like the law of gravity. It's a law of the universe. There's no fighting it. And I would like to say, oh yeah, that's that artsy fartsy, whatever, woo-woo stuff. But I gotta tell you, I've been married now for 30 years, and yeah, it goes fast. And when I started looking at the laws of the universe, because my father was a single dad, and he was a big fan of philosophy. So I was brought up on philosophy, so much so that I actually endearingly called my father Philosopher Dad. I wrote a book about him. I'll tell you about that later. So Philosopher Dad used to always kind of spew out this line of philosophy, hoping that it would solve whatever problem I had taken to him. So I'm grateful for that the laws of the universe. My dad was part of the fellowship of the Rosicrucians, which study laws of the universe and scientific evidence. And science, as we know, it's evolving every day, which is why I gravitate toward programs like Smart Recovery that use science and evidence-based techniques and tools in their recovery models. So I like that. And what I often do as well, you'll notice, is that I go off topic a lot and then I forget where I was, right? So the thoughts are out there floating around. So I think what I was trying to say is let's be cognizant, let's be aware of what we're feeding into that narrative, that inner critic that just keeps going around in our mind. Because if we can control the words that are feeding the thoughts and keep them positive, then we're more likely to have better moods, better emotions, better feelings, and then that will correspond into better behavior. Wow, right? Who doesn't love a great equation like that? So the whole premise around law of attraction, maybe I think that's what I was trying to get to, is that everything is energy. Who said that? Einstein, somebody, the physics guy. I can't think of his name right now, but anyway, the physics guy, everything is energy, energy is everything, and we're basically just bouncing blobs of energy, right? We're emitting a frequency all the time. And the way to control that frequency is to, I think, control our language. So our words, which are feeding the thoughts, and the thoughts are feeding our feelings, our emotions, our moods, and of course that feeds our behavior, results in our behavior. So this conscious reminder about everything is energy, we control it with the power of our thoughts. So the world of quantum physics, there's a really good movie. It might be available on YouTube or Netflix or one of those streaming services. What the Bleep Do We Know, I think it's called. Really good, engaging movie and a lot of great information around quantum physics. And that's when I was introduced to the power of words, actually, several years ago when I watched that movie with an experiment that was done with water crystals. Dr. Emoto, I think he's passed away in the last couple of years, but he was doing some extraordinary work with the power of our words on water. That if you put a label on water, it actually changes its molecular structure. So he was showing the evidence that you put thank you on a droplet of water and you take a microscopic picture and it's like this nice pristine snowflake. And then that same drop of water, you change the label to something like you fool, and it turns into this ugly, brown, murky mess. And I thought it was a really powerful visual. If you get a chance to see that movie, I recommend it because it's like, wow. That's amazing because we are like over 70% water, we human beings, right? So that kind of, for me, thought, yeah, right, exactly. If the power of words can do that to a droplet of water, the words that we're talking to ourselves, that's really having that effect on us internally. So that was one of my aha moments, for sure, is watching that movie, What the Bleep Do We Know? And so, you know, nothing is solid. We're just bouncing blobs of energy. And the Nobel Prize winners in physics proved that this physical world that we're living in is just one big ocean of energy. And it materializes and dematerializes in a split second, and it happens over and over and over again. And they proved that thoughts are responsible for holding this ever-changing energy field together in the form and shape of the objects that we know. It's pretty fascinating stuff. So when you think of a film roll, and they kind of do this on that movie too, a film is a collection of about 24 frames per second, and each frame is separated from the other by a small space. So compared to the speed that these frames are changing with, our eyes are tricked and they see them as a continual film. So it's, learning how quantum physics works and how energy is all just, we can form it with our thoughts. It's pretty intense. I know, paradoxical. We could have another 30-minute program just on that, just on quantum physics. So let's get back to smart recovery, because this is what we're talking about in addiction recovery. Whether you're trying to recover from substance or behavioral addictions, smart recovery has something that you can use in tools and techniques. And one of my favorites, cognitive behavioral therapy with smart recovery, is not only turning that rational analysis inward when I catch myself feeding that inner critic with more negative narratives, I like to do what's called the hula hoop. So if you can imagine, remember the hula hoops from the 70s? If you can imagine that you've got a hula hoop around your waist, and there's this dome that goes either way. So just it's encasing you in a dome of light. And that's just kind of your bubble. I like to refer to it as my vibe bubble. That's what I'm emitting, and that's all that I can control. That's what's within my control. So there's this little meme. It was making its way around social media, and it represented the hula hoop philosophy. What's within my control? Well, I can certainly control my language, correct? And something interesting about language is that our English language dictionary has 3 times as many negative words as positive words. I know, right? It's like, wow. So we have to work 3 times as hard to even formulate a positive thought sentence. So yeah, our words are definitely within our control. What else is within our control? What I say, what I do, my opinions, never any shortage of those. My self-care is within my control. My thoughts, my actions, what I eat, what I look at online, who I'm hanging around with, what I read, my boundaries. So what's beyond our control? Let's take a look at that, because we often forget to ask ourselves that question. What around this is actually within my control? Well, I have no control over other people's actions. I have no control over what other people think. I have absolutely no control over other people's opinions, or what other people say, or what other people think, what they feel, what they post online, what they believe. It's all beyond my control. And when I stop and remind myself, what can I do from where I am with what I have right now? What's within my control? It helps me get over that initial anxiety that sometimes, early on in recovery, urges are to be expected, right? We talk about that often in our recovery meetings, how to handle the urges, because they come long and strong, as we say, early in recovery, and you learn, when you work at it, you will learn how to ride those waves of recovery. And then, once we learn to manage our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, then we can help transcend those feelings of urges, right? When we're directing that rational analysis inward. What can I control? What can I do right now with what I have from where I am? Just got to cue up Russell's song for the extra. We're coming to the end of our 30 minutes already. Holy mackerel, it goes fast. So I encourage you to start directing rational analysis inward. Go to the smartrecovery.org website and look at some of the tools and techniques that they do there. You can download a couple of the templates that we use on our meetings, and they're free. It's called the CBA, the cost benefit analysis. You can download that exercise free. And also the HOV, the hierarchy of values. That's a great one to do, because it comes with 3 questions, I think, that are very important to ask and answer on a daily basis. We're going to talk more about those next week. So thanks so much for joining me for episode 2 of the Red Roof Recovery Radio Show. I am so grateful that you have chosen to hang out with me for 30 minutes of your day. Thank you so much. I mentioned earlier in the program that I wrote a book in honor of my philosopher dad. You can get that on Amazon. And it's called Mindful Wisdom from My Philosopher Dad. It's a tribute to my father. He raised me as a single dad way back in the 60s. And my philosopher dad taught me that the transition to adulthood can often be a bumpy ride. No kidding. And as I said, psychological children trying to fill emotional voids that were not fulfilled while we were growing up. That learning to love ourselves piece is huge. It was for me. And then, of course, dealing with the social and cultural conditioning that's always demanding that we behave a certain way. So my second book is going to be out soon, Daily Wisdom from My Philosopher Dad. So I hope you'll look for that soon on Amazon as well. A lot of those daily reflections in the Daily Wisdom book not only come from my philosopher dad, but also from other things that I've done throughout my life, mentors, my own life experiences, books I've read, seminars I've attended. So I encourage you to look for mentorship in your recovery journey. My wish for you is to always live fully, laugh often, love always, and stay positive. May the force be with you, and remember, you are the force.